It is ladies first, and it will be Irene Cañas who will report first on the group discussions looking at the solutions this time and not the challenges on emerging electricity systems with high demand growth. We're looking forward to what you have to say.
Thanks. Well, thank you. First, I will do a brief recap of the summary of the challenges that we have identified last Wednesday. The first one is that some of the countries, they don't have a clear renewable energy target, and sometimes they also cannot have any priorities defined, and also a lack of definition on the roles and responsibilities of the key actors. And by key actors, I mean policymakers, regulators, utilities, private sector. And also there is a need for a clear and consistent policy to provide stability or security to the private sector or the investors. There's also in some countries not a clear limit on the transmission and distributors' responsibilities. So sometimes if we want to grow on more renewables, they start to blame on the other. So now this is a distributor's problem, and the distributor, now this is a transmission problem. And also, in some of the developing countries or emerging economies, we don't have international standards for different technologies. And today, we had a great discussion about the possible solutions, and I will talk a little bit about that, about the solutions. So the first thing that we were discussing is very important to set the goal, and in some cases, the emerging markets, they don't have the same needs. So in some cases, countries, what they want to achieve is more access to electricity for their population. In other countries, that's a problem solved. So the priority is completely the opposite or completely different. So the first thing is to set this goal on each country, and then the chain or the rest of the events started from there. Are we going to do this with centralized options or decentralized options? What kind of technology are we going to use? And we had the discussion also in the types of technology. And at least in my group, what I was saying is, well, after the COP21 agreement, the options are different before that. So if we have to give energy to the population that doesn't have access, it should be with renewable sources. And we were talking about also that the planning is very important. And yesterday when we were, the ones who were on the panel of planning and modeling, the key answers of when, where, which technology, at what cost, is very important. So if we are going to think about how IRENA can help on all of this, I think they have a very important part on each step. And for example, we were thinking about the planning. It's very important to have technical support on these main questions. Where, when, which technology, at what cost. So if we're going to give electricity to a population, where we have to do a good planning and answer all these questions. If we want to have more renewables, because that's our target, also we have to answer these questions: when, where, which, and at what cost. Also, one of the solutions is that these emerging economies should be on the discussions of the standards, the international standards for the technology. Most of the time, these decisions, these standards, had been set by the developed countries. So if we want the emerging economies to use these technologies, they should be part of the discussion and set the standards. Another solution that we were talking, and that also Irina can have a very important role, is that most of the times we don't have in the same page the policymakers and the technical people. So the technical people, that maybe they have the answer of how much, where, when, but the policymakers, they don't have any idea. And sometimes they take the wrong decisions. So we were thinking about, it is important to explain the high level, how the energy market or the energy sector is changing and the transformation of this. So one of the possible solutions is to give them in a language that they can understand what's going on in this transition to renewables. Also, we were thinking that one solution is to give the space to share the lessons learned. Developing countries already made some decisions and they success in some of them, but not success in others. So the emerging economies, we can learn a lot from those lessons. So we have to think, or Irina can help us, given that experience to the emerging economies. And also it is very important to, in order to get the investment in these emerging economies, sometimes the financial health of the utilities is not very good. Sometimes it's also the country financial health is not very good. So we have to work on that, because most of these emerging markets, they have trouble finding financement to do all the investments for renewables, and also to bring the access to electricity to other communities. And the last thing that we were thinking about is that is maybe a solution, or it could be a good solution, to use the municipalities for pilot projects. So we can put the innovation on pilot project, and we can show the success of this transition to renewable energies. Another thing, I think this is the last one, is that we are not having the same meaning for some words in the energy sector. So, for example, we were talking about the regulator. In some countries, the regulator has some things to do, but in other countries it's completely different. And the same happens with other words that we use in this energy language. So it will be very helpful to have like one dictionary so we can talk the same language when we are talking about energy. And also, I forget one that is very important, is that some of the people that were in this group, they were saying that it would be very important if Irina can develop a guide that give us clues to all these planning and how to go on this transition onto renewables, like a systematic approach of the energy sector planning. And that will be all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Irene. It's nice of you to expect Irina to provide the guidance, to be the guide, or to produce the guides. Thank you for spelling out not only challenges but also solutions and what you expect from Irina. Now, I'm not going to ask at this point whether there are any additions, but I'm going to ask the second rapporteur, Mark van Stiphout, to report on the parallel session 3, looking at the mature electricity systems with low demand growth.
Good. This is a bit too small for all my notes, papers, and other tools that should help me to remember what it is that we discussed, because I think it's fair to say that we had a very, very rich discussion already on Wednesday and again today. I'm extremely grateful for having led these discussions, because it was a very interesting discussion and I think a lot of interesting output, and I'm also very grateful for Irina for the help they provided, for example, in making these slides in a few hours or maybe even less, because they also had to listen in and take pictures in the meantime. So, a summary of what we discussed. First, let's go back to what we were talking about. Oh. Sorry, now everything's still fine, but one of my tools just stopped. Anyway, so summary of what we discussed on Wednesday in terms of what are the innovation needs and also what are the key characteristics of the mature energy systems that we're talking about, or the mature electricity systems. So as I said on Wednesday, the key issue doesn't seem to be specific technologies or technology inventions, but it's really the grid integration. So that's, oh yeah, this is really going wrong. No, that's you. Good, thank you. I've outsourced part of the presentation, as you can see. Good, so the issue is grid integration. The issue is also many of the technologies are already available, but it's about how do we organize that these technologies are implemented. Rules, operational codes, policies, etc. are really the key. So we need an ambitious regulation and we need proper planning. One of the particular things that came out, also I think today in the discussion and this morning, the interactions between TSOs and DSOs. It made me also think what Irene was saying, but because if you talk about the right definition of what a TSO does or what a DSO does, at least in Europe, it's probably not much better than in emerging economies. In particular, if we talk about the distribution level. I think for TSOs there is quite a common definition of what they're supposed to do, but where the responsibilities end, how they cooperate with DSOs, that's really something that is being discussed at the moment. One thing also I said already on Wednesday, if we want to innovate, we have to accept that not everything can be at least cost. We have to experiment, we have to try things. So the regulation that really focuses on reducing the cost of the grid is something that we need to think of. Of course, we need to make sure that the investments are as cheap as possible, but we still need to allow for experiments. I think one of the questions is, do you want to be those experiments part of the regulated business, or do you want to allow for experiments in the market more than shift a bit the definition of tasks, for example, from regulated to market-based, but we need to allow for innovation, and we need to accept that that leads to sometimes costs that, when looking back, we would have thought that they could have been avoided. And last but not least, if we want markets to find the right solutions and we want to frame markets so that they find the right solutions, then we would need to make sure that we adequately value the aspects that are very important for a market to function, like resilience, like security, which become ever more important with more variable renewables. So that was a little bit where we left off on Wednesday. And because we focus so much on the importance of rules, policies, we decided today that we would still give it another try to see if there is also some scope for real technology innovation, and what is the scope for that. And it seems that on Wednesday everybody said, okay, from 20 to 50% variable renewables, that's all fine, we have the technologies, it's a matter of implementing them. So we thought, okay, then let's push the border a bit and let's try to discuss what we need to do if we talk about 80% renewables and variable renewables in particular. So then the innovation across sectors become much more important, as storing electricity in heat, where heat pumps were discussed, but also in other things like chemical storage, so in hydrogen or nitrate, for example. So one of the topics that came up was that maybe at the moment hydrogen is not that much of a factor, or chemical storage is not that much of a factor, but when we need to start looking at how do we bridge the difference between renewable generated electricity in the summer and in the winter, where arguably in the winter there's a lot less in Europe, then we need to look at longer term storage, and then hydrogen and other ways of chemical storage will become more important. Of course also the link with mobility, but I think that has been discussed also in some other discussion groups these days. The need for innovation in electric cars and batteries, I think that's obvious, everybody agrees that we need to make steps there. One point that was made that I thought was very interesting was that if we look at cooperation across sectors, for example, between electricity and gas and heat, then we're often talking about cooperation across sectors that have vested interests and that do not necessarily benefit from this cross-sector cooperation. And it requires very often also government interventions to say, okay, we're going to stop using gas in homes and we're going to switch to district heating. And then there's cooperation, or then there's just a blunt shift from one sector to the other. But by itself, we cannot be confident enough that these discussions will come because of the vested interest that the different sectors have. With one positive note, which is ICT. If we assume that there is going to be an ICT overlay over the energy system, then that ICT overlay will also make it possible to combine and to find synergies or unused capacities in different sectors. The last point on innovation and technology innovation was DC grids, both high voltage, long distance, referring to the presentation that was given about how the Chinese see the role of high voltage DC, but also in low voltage, so in the small scale and the low voltage use of electricity, there may be a need for more innovation in DC grids, because that may lead to a lot of efficiency compared to AC losses. Then we also took some time to discuss innovation and the role of smart meters, because that was a topic that we also felt was not sufficiently discussed on Wednesday, and that came up repeatedly in some of the different discussions during these 3 days. So we dedicated a bit of time to that. And actually the conclusion was that at the moment they are not that crucial to facilitate renewable innovation. And that some of the people said that seldom in our group. So if they say that it's not that crucial, then I think we can assume that it's not that crucial. but they said so far, at the moment, if we're talking about 80% variable renewables, then they will become important, although there was quite a nuance in that discussion, because the question is it then a smart meter, or is it just the fact that you need data and you need basically everything connected to a data infrastructure so that you can measure it and control it. So much more than smart meters, it seems to be data, a data infrastructure, IP addresses, and the communication channels between all these different assets that are then becoming smart and have, let's say, chips so that they can communicate. That seems to be much more important than the meter itself, because the meter itself depends very much on different systems and different system needs, which differ in Europe even from distribution to distribution system. Let's say from Bonn to Frankfurt, you may find quite different needs in terms of how to meter and what kind of solutions distribution system operators are looking for. And another thing that was mentioned there in relation to smart meters or data infrastructure in the larger sense was security, safety, security, resilience, again, hacking in particular. If we choose the lowest or the cheapest options for all kind of data infrastructure and it's very easy to hack, then we may find our grandmothers being cooked alive in their home when their heat pump is hacked and also their electric blanket is being hacked. So this can lead to very nasty outcomes that we should avoid. So that's a little bit on the innovation and the need for innovation that we discussed today. Now, international cooperation. And so what's the scope for international cooperation according to the group discussion that we had, and what is the role of IRENA? So, no surprise, I'm starting to repeat myself, I'm sorry about that, but a focus on policies, rules, operating practices that promote innovation. So one thing that came out in the discussion is that actually we need a framework that allows us to identify and characterize better the innovation in the system. Because let's say if we talk about the share of renewables or the share of variable renewables in the system, whether it's 20, 50, 80 or 100, that seems, or that was perceived as being too simplistic. That's not useful enough if you want to, as a country or as a policy maker or as a TSO or DSO want to know what to do, then you need more than just knowing how many renewables you have in your system or how many variable renewables you have in your system. So, for example, but this was just a brief discussion and by no way an exhausting list, or did we want to pretend that we know what this analytical framework is, but I think the request and the identification that there is a need for such an analytical framework, that's also practical. So not something very theoretical that academics can write books about, but something that policymakers can understand to say what are the different phases if you talk about integrating renewables in the grid, and what is the starting point, and how can I identify where I am myself and what is the next step. And so looking at a better developed analytical framework, for example, looking at flexibility in a more intelligent way or in a more nuanced way, there are different types of flexibility. You can talk about grid services, you can talk about balancing, so voltage control, congestion management. So what kind of flexibility, for example, do you need at what stage of your transition, let's say, away from existing fossil fuel generation to more renewables. And linked with this was the question, who is actually leading in innovation? Because as we heard already Mr. Barker here on Wednesday, he was basically saying all these renewables integration, people were expecting big problems, but actually it was quite easy. Or maybe he didn't say exactly quite easy, but it didn't cause any major problems that people were warning them about. And if you look at what they did, they also didn't take any drastic measures. They still didn't, much to the frustration of the European Commission, for example, or the Netherlands, they still didn't build big power cables from the north to the south of Germany. Still the system functions. And they haven't made any huge investments in distribution system capacity or in smart meters. They don't even plan to roll out smart meters. So Germany may not even be that innovative, even if they have very high shares of renewables. So how do you identify what are really the leading countries or the leading regions, the leading areas where that are at the forefront of the innovation? That is something that would be good to identify, and where hopefully such an analytical framework can help to identify them. The countries that were mentioned, just to give some honor to people if they are here from Denmark or from Hawaii, at least from Hawaii, there for sure was somebody here, but Denmark I don't know, but they are the ones that were mentioned as countries that are really, or countries, areas, states, that are at the forefront of innovation, of integrating renewables into the grid. Good. So, analytical tools to help to find the best solutions. What else do we have? Again, the role of ICT. So, in particular in international cooperation, if ICT has such a big role, then ICT also being in particular a thing that's international, that travels very fast across the world. So cooperation in ICT was something that was identified as something where there could be more international cooperation, involving also more the telecom companies, the utilities, the mobile utilities, semiconductor firms, and looking at this Internet of Things discussion. So trying to link into that discussion also a bit more from the energy point of view was something that was considered useful. Let me see if I now have said everything. So I should stop, you're saying? Almost.
Finish what you have.
Okay, good. I just have one more slide after this, but I will take less time to discuss it. Okay? But one of the outcomes I think that was in our discussion was also that actually, of course, we discussed mature electricity systems with kind of stable or stagnating demand, but that there is a lot of scope for cooperation, and there are a lot of issues that seem to be, from what we perceived in the group that we were, also issues for islands, for the microgrids, for the rural systems, or also for the emerging systems. For example, this question of energy market reform and what kind of policies, what kind of operational rules, what kind of codes do you use to unlock the flexibility and to get investments in the flexibility solutions that are available. That is something that is not just an issue for the established electricity systems, let's say, but that's also an issue for the ones that are developing and for the emerging economy. So the ones where there is growth in electricity demand, they seem to have the same challenges. So there is a lot of scope for exchange of information there and to learn of each other. And secondly, when I already mentioned DC grids, I mentioned Hawaii being one of the front runners in terms of showing what's technologically possible. Also there, using islands as an inspiration for how to organize a market and also as a possibility to test solutions is something where international cooperation can make sense. I know and also in the EU we have quite some projects that look at islands, of course a lot smaller, like one of the Greek islands, an island off the coast of Germany, where they want to say we want to go to 100% renewables. How does that work? So there are quite some projects going on like that, and I think that we think that international cooperation can try to look at exchange of information on those particular challenges. So, of course, all of those things could be done by IRENA, but trying to put a bit of a focus on what IRENA could take as a particular role, of course, providing experience, best practices, how to unlock innovation, how to unlock the integration technologies, the flexibility technologies. Second point that was raised is that Brazil should become a member. So if anybody here has an important phone number in Brazil, then please give it to Dolph. And then for Latin America, but I think this is also a more general point, which links to the previous point on the analytical framework, and the second point here is you want to start from what are all the different options, where am I, and what is the logic's next step. So do we need interconnectors, or do we need, for example, more focus on an ICT overlay structure to make the system that we have more intelligent, realizing that countries have different starting points. So that's also the fourth point here, help in understanding how ICT helps and maybe facilitating the discussion between the ICT and the energy sectors. The fifth point I have already said, and the sixth point as well. So, once again, thank you very much for your attention. Thanks to everybody who cooperated in the discussions, and looking forward to what's next. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for this view on the discussion in the group on mature electricity systems, and thank you very much for your charming pushback on the cocky Germans celebrating their prowess in managing electricity systems. What comes next is Konrad Hunte with the presentation on the decentralized electricity systems for islands and rural electrification to complete this cycle of report backs from the group discussions. Konrad.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Of course, as you've heard from the big system and the more mature system. Of course, we were dealing with decentralized system on islands and remote areas. So, of course, you would imagine in a discussion like this, the issue of algorithms and information technology is on the bottom end. The whole issue of the systemics in terms of addressing the issue to solve problems and solutions is where we had most of our focus. So I may disappoint you if you do not see a lot on technology, because sometimes for islands, it's not about the technology, just about the access first. So let's say, and I guess you can say the perception was the innovation about technology on islands was more or less down the line of having a focus, as I said, on the systemic aspect. Looking at systemics, innovation was required to allow for innovative business model. This was one of the things that was highlighted. We looked at areas where systems should evolve to allow for more renewable generation and provide private sector participation. That was one of the highlights as it relates to systemic issues. Of course, the issue of training of staff at local government utilities was emphasized, where the approach should shift from more of an ad hoc approach to a more institutionalized approach. It was also important to look at the whole issue of some alignment of government and the utility company. Because on islands, as you know, most islands, the government owns the utility, not in all cases, but it's important to have them singing from the same hymn sheet. There's an alignment with goals and where you want to go, so as you will have a non-starter of a project. We also looked at the issue of policies that should be taken into consideration to link between energy access, income generation, and cost reduction. Innovation in financing that were tailored, which would require specific context, technologies, and scale. Because it's important to look at the whole issue of scale, because it's in any financing, I mean, sometimes you have people coming to you with 5 million, 20 million, but then you're a small island. It may work in some areas, And so we also had a little problem in deciding what was a small island, and I almost got in trouble when I said island was a big island, and there was some dispute to that, whether island itself was a big island or it was a small island. So, but to give you some comparisons, for me, islands, when they're considered really, really small, will have to be an island, maybe a population of maybe 200,000-300,000 people. I would say Jamaica is an island, but Jamaica is a big island. Guyana is not an island, but it's considered a part of the island mechanism, but it's as big as UK. And many people don't know that. So when you're comparing, and these are islands with higher populations, so when you're looking at solutions, you have to break it down to the type of island. Pacific, the same. They are remote, but most of the islands are very small, except for a few big ones like Fiji. So we have to take all these things into consideration when we're trying to design a solution for islands and remote areas. Another thing that we highlighted was the increased flexibility that is needed to reduce requirements for access to financing. As you know, getting financing is difficult. Most islands start getting finances based on a government guarantee. No one is going to take a chance without a government guarantee. So there needs to be some mechanism to have some flexibility in terms of, private sector participating, because it's difficult if it's only a government guarantee going to have a project approved. There are other actors in the renewable energy market right now who would like to do business in islands, but without a government guarantee, it presents a problem. On the technology front, there were some issues. Oh, I forgot. Another systemic issue was whole link to sectors in terms of water supply and irrigation. That we thought that would be a good innovative approach to in terms of how we look at things. On the technology front, there was the issue of cost reduction, quality improvements, especially for battery storage and smart meter. Adoption of appropriate standards we thought could address these issues. The use of customized solution, example, DC mini-grids was also highlighted as a part of our discussion. It was cited that these are oftentimes more efficient and easier to manage. Technology scope should include what we felt was new innovation should be implemented in that field. In terms of, when you speak of technology, there are some cases where you have best practices and new technology, but still a provider may approach you with a storage situation, and he's bringing to you the old batteries that were used 4 years ago. But of course, that can present a problem. He's telling you this is new technology. But when there are far advanced batteries available, newer technology, so that's one of the areas we thought should be highlighted. Technology innovation in the field of grid integration of variable technologies, collecting of fees in rural areas, for example, through mobile payments, policy frameworks that should facilitate innovation in technology solution without, in essence, picking winners, showcasing success stories of the application of innovative technology for a specific project, which should also include, as I said, the newest technology. On the operational issues, we looked at issues which included coping with high shares of variable renewable, as well as the sustainability of the mini-grids system in the long term. Training was considered very important in operating grids with high shares of renewable, and it was necessary as well to associate it with some sort of modeling tool to ensure the predictability. The standardization, that too was a big issue. Standardization methodology for assessing the grid, integration of high shares of renewable, especially when it comes to islands, not so much on the remote areas. And the whole issue of operating new methods to cope with risk was also one of the innovative things that was mentioned. Innovative risks that would, in essence, try to assist the situation in not to allow failure, more or less. Because it's important that as institutions come to you or investors come to you, some institutions are looking at the risk on return. It's not everyone is going to come with this humanitarian aspect of it. They're looking, well, if it fails, it fails. I'm providing light. I'm providing some sort of energy for these people. They're all looking at the bottom line. Will I get my money back? So I think here we need to be innovative also, because when it comes to the donors or international actors, it seems like there's a prescribed way of modeling assistance. So perhaps there could be some flexibility in these areas to assist small islands and remote areas, because the challenges that they face are far different to the rest of the makeup of those who are seeking to transition to renewable energy. And finally, on the issue of procurement, which was often mentioned as areas where there could be some improvement, international organizations we thought could perhaps play a greater role in supporting and establishing a process as well as capacity building. And like previous speaker, we thought there was a role for IRENA. Of course, IRENA can help. It's now doing the work of trying to present best practices. It should continue to do that. But I think there's a specific role for small islands and remote areas where IRENA can play a central role in guiding them, because the case for islands, being an island person, I hope I'm not being too biased, but the case for islands it's a unique case. And with low capacity, it often ends up I have seen what we call white elephants, systems that were put together that fail. So it's important to have an institution like IRENA to guide the process and as we move forward in the transition to renewable energy. And one of the things that was highlighted by one of the panelists was the whole issue of ensuring that there is a project manager from start to end. And there is some continuity built into designing projects on islands that cater for maintenance. I think this was one of the issues. So having said that, Mr. Moderator, I think these are some of the more important points. There were lots more I have here on my iPad, but I thought it would be good if I just highlighted some of the more points that jumped out in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. And stay Thank you very much, Conrad, for that overview. And we do look forward to having all of the comments that you have on your iPad, because they will be woven into the reporting mechanism out of this conference that will be on the website. So all the slides will be on the website, and including the results websites as well as a report of everything. May I ask Irene and Mark to join us on stage as well. Ladies and gentlemen, if you now have additional comments to make on the innovation agenda, on the role of IRENA, and how we get the solutions in place, international cooperation, then this is the time. Any additions? Or do I assume that everything has been said and that you just want to hear the final words, have a cup of coffee and go home? Yes, there's a question there. Raise your hand so that the microphone can find you. Microphones have eyes, you know.
Thank you very much. One thing about innovation that I find very interesting is that, we always innovate for a purpose, right? And is the innovation to make lots of money? Is the innovation to create a lower carbon system? Is the innovation there to create a secure system, and so on? And it would seem to me that maybe there's a little bit of a gap in some of our discourse around what the drivers for innovation are going to be from the point of view of the innovators, who are often in industry and governments or in universities, because there are different things that drive them, right? So governments want to have a good regulatory framework and other things, whereas industrialists want to make money. And I wonder if there's not some space to investigate, trying to understand what the future drivers are going to be, so that folk have the right kinds of incentives to realize the innovation potential that is out there. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like you want to have a theory of how to get ideas to impact, and explaining the innovation process along the way, and how it is funded. Any other points that you want to raise? Do you wish to comment on one another's presentations? Do you want to add something to what you've said? Mark spoke for quite some time. Irene spoke for a short time. Irene, do you want to add something? No. You don't? No, they're not urging to speak. So if you don't have any questions, then the best thing for me to do is to... Yes, there is a question. Good. And
it's more a question for Mark. So you indicated that in your session it was said that there is not a real need for smart metering, for example, but shouldn't there be a push then on European level, for example, that pushes the governments to invest more in renewables instead of doing huge investments in smart metering? And how should that be steered, like those investments in renewables, and to reach the 80 or 100% of renewables, for example?
I think that we are pushing for both. So on the one hand, smart meters, and on the other hand, renewables. I agree that, let's say, it was, for me, a little bit uncomfortable, said I say, that the discussion in the group was that actually smart meters may not be that necessary, because indeed in Europe we are mandating a rollout of them. But I actually think that has to do also with the fact that the discussions we were having were really about how can we integrate more renewables into the system, and do we need smart meters for that? Whereas in Europe or in the EU, one of the reasons for smart meters is also to increase energy efficiency, to increase awareness, to promote much more competition in the retail markets by going towards a model of energy services. And I still think that for those things you need a metering that is much more sophisticated than the traditional meters we have now. So I still think that it's a necessary thing to do. Also to facilitate, if we go to 80, let's say to equip the system with more data points that allow to measure it more and to go to even higher shares of renewables. But there are some countries that have said, we don't think we need to do it, and then, let's say from the Commission or from the EU point of view, that's also fine. So I don't think that we need to choose between investing in renewables or in meters. I do think we need to both, and I think, of course, we need to be very ambitious in renewables, and in meters, it's more up to countries to decide when.
Thank you. You want to, yeah, both of you want to add. Ladies first.
Yes, I would like to add something at that, and I totally agree with you. And the other day, I was participating in a seminar, and someone was trying to compare the energy sector with the telecommunications sector. And the energy sector was very comfortable for so many years. Nothing new happened. And suddenly, the floor started to move to all of us. So the thing started to change, and to change so fast, that now we are consumers more aware of the energy. So I agree totally that smart grid and smart metering, it's a matter of the consumer being aware of how is he or she using the electricity and energy efficiency, and how can we manage this, the energy in our homes or in our work. So we don't need that to have more renewables. I think it's a different objective. And now the energy sector is going very fast. And all of the actors, they have to go on that road and started to change and be more flexible. And I also think that the innovation is in all levels, not just in technology. It's also in, we have to innovate on policies, on laws, and the rules and everything.
Thank you. Conrad?
Thank you. Thank you. My question is not really related, but the first speaker did mention something about drivers of innovation. Perhaps I can speak to that in the sense, when you say drivers of innovation, I'm talking about islands now, because not big systems. Of course, on islands, you know what is expected. There's no oil, so everything is imported. In terms of our GDP, the entire Caribbean, most of the Eastern Caribbean, the import of oil makes up the vast part of our bill in terms of our expenditure. So we're looking at it in a sense of reducing our expenditure. So that's a driver. So new technologies such as deploying solar PV or wind is, in essence, the first thing is to reduce our dependency on import of oil. So that's a saving for us. Second, we sort of piggyback on, if you want to say, our climate obligation, because what we produce in CO2 is minuscule. So it's not that we're trying to address our climate issues. We're looking at more of an economical survival on an island. So we're looking to go transition to renewable, to save on paying that money to the oil company which we import from. So basically, in some remote areas, it may not be the same. They may be just looking just for access because they may not even have the basic in terms of even one light bulb. But for most islands that I know, they're fully electrified. But the high cost of paying for utilities is what really kills everyone. So if the government can, in essence, transition to a renewable energy that will lower our bills, that's our priority. As a matter of fact, I will let you know, we have just commissioned to have installed a 10 megawatt. We've already installed 3 on the island, 3 out of that 10. And we are going to deploy the other 7 in a matter of probably next 10 months. We should have the complete installation. 1 megawatt on our sister island and the rest distributed around the island. And it's all to address the whole issue of importation of fuel. Because on small islands, we don't spend on much in terms of, we import everything, of course, but oil is the biggest expenditure when you look at the budgets every year.
And here the economic interest of islands is actually very similar to those of mountain villages or of villages in the Arctic.
I would imagine any remote situation, just the transportation of that fuel would be a difficult thing and be very costly.
Excuse me. Any other questions? No, then I thank you very much for your reporting all the way since Wednesday. Great job. Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, let's give them a great hand. And for the final words in the closure, I hand over to Dolph Gielen from IRENA, the hosts here. In doing so, I want to say something, and that is, you know, behind the scenes, there were so many parallel groups, there was so much preparation going on. There were the site visits already before the conference started. And then there was the reporting mechanism. When I was able to present the outcome of all the deep dive sessions on 7 slides, that was only possible because so many of your competent staff who are dedicated and competent spent time, not only during the conference, but also at night. I got emails at 4 o'clock in the morning, making it possible that all of this comes together. You have a fabulous staff, fabulous cooperation, and I look at you, but I actually want to thank all the people who are here in the background. Dolph.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, at the beginning of the week, the colleagues asked me, what do you expect this week? And I said, well, I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I'm sure it's going to be a success. And I think I was mistaken. It was not a success, it was a great success. We heard about the importance of the energy transition for the power sector. We heard about a range of drivers for that transition, which are different, of course, by region and by country. But the reduction of cost and the emergence of new technologies, both generation technologies and also grid technologies and technologies on the demand side play a key role in that. We also heard about the importance of innovations in other sectors, such as ICT and material sciences that have a direct impact on the development of the electricity sector. And we heard about, for example, big data for communication and systems integration. We heard about electric vehicles and other important developments that will affect the future of the electricity sector and that will also create new opportunities for renewables. We also heard about the different aspects of innovation. So innovation includes, of course, technology. And we've seen very rapid technology progress, and we will see more technology progress, but technology alone is not enough. We also need innovation in policy frameworks, in business models, in the processes and various other aspects. And there is a rapidly building experience in this field, and there's a lot to be learned from best practice and from applying best practice. We've had 7 deep dive sessions, and we have had 3 group discussions, and we just heard the summary of all of these, so I will not repeat that, but I think there is a rich body of new thoughts and insights that we can build on. We will make the materials from this event available. We aim to have the slides and the presentations online in the next 1 to 2 weeks. We will also prepare a summary report, and we will do that in cooperation with the group moderators and with the chairs of the deep dive sessions. So there will be 1 round of review. And we aim to have a close to final draft by the end of May. And we want to actively promote the findings of this conference. So a first occasion is the technology mechanism of the UNFCCC. We'll have a meeting here in Bonn on the 19th of May, where we'll bring these results to the attention. And then on the 26th of May, that is following the IRENA Council meeting, there will be an Innovation Day in Abu Dhabi. And part of that day will focus on the findings of this Innovation Week. And that will then help us to use the findings to shape the future agenda for IRENA and its 146 member states. This was the first IRENA Innovation Week, and in the breaks I already received some very useful feedback on how this format can be further improved. That is very helpful, but of course if you have additional thoughts what could be done, then that is most welcome. Let us know now after the event, or send us an email, or whatever mode of communication is most convenient for you. We also welcome your feedback on what to do for the next Innovation Week. So this one focused on power sector transformation. Should that be deepened next year? Should that be a different theme, a different focus? So your thoughts there would also be very welcome. I would like to thank the partner organizations, the chairs, the panelists, the rapporteurs, and the participants that have made this such a rich engagement. I would like to thank Andreas Kremer, who has greatly helped us in shaping and managing this event. And of course, I would like to thank the IRENA colleagues who all have contributed to making this work. And especially I want to thank Ruud Kempener, who hasn't had any sleep for the last 3 months in making this happen. So now you're allowed to go and catch up. This concludes the IRENA Innovation Week. So thank you very much again. I wish you safe travels home. Thank you very much.